Now it's time to grab your piece of mesh and one of your binding strips. So I'm just going to finger press that binding wrong sides together in half. And I'm going to pin this in place to the top edge of the mesh. And depending on which direction you cut your mesh, one direction is not stretchy and one direction is a little bit stretchy. So depending on which way you cut the mesh, it might stretch out a little bit. It's fine if it stretches out a little bit longer. We can always trim that mesh down after we've gotten it sewn in place to the lining of the bag. I'm going to sew this pinned edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but it's really important to sew with the fabric against the bed of your sewing machine because there's so many gaps and holes in the mesh. It's a bit harder to sew with it against the bottom of your machine, so just make sure that the fabric is face down. Okay, now we're going to press the seam up toward the binding. And it's fine to press the mesh, it's not going to melt or anything like that. Okay, and now we're going to bring that folded edge of the binding down so that it meets the opposite side. Okay, and just use the Wonder Clips to clip that in place. Okay, we're going to sew this lower edge 1/8 of an inch away from the fabric. Okay, after I sew the binding to the mesh, as you can see, usually it looks a bit wavy, so just hit it with your iron really quick to smooth it out. Okay, and then next we'll be attaching the zipper. And for attaching the zipper to the binding and the mesh, I like to use this Dritz Wonder Tape, and it's 1/4 of an inch wide, and it's a double-sided adhesive. So one side is sticky, which will attach to the zipper first, and then once that's stuck down, the paper just peels away. So here's the zipper, and I'm just going to stick that wash away Wonder Tape to the very lower edge of the zipper. And in the pattern, I instruct for this portion to be used with an all-purpose skirt and dress zipper, just like we did with the pouch. But I actually didn't have any zippers in the color that I liked to match my lining and my exterior fabrics in the skirt and dress zipper. So here I'm using a handbag zipper. But in the pattern, you're directed to use that all-purpose skirt and dress zipper. Okay, so just push that down with your fingers, and then one side of the paper will just start to peel off, and it'll reveal the second side of the adhesive. And this makes it definitely a lot easier to insert the zipper because the binding and the mesh kind of want to stretch out as you sew it in place. And by sticking it down first, you'll be assured that things won't look stretched out. Okay, and you'll just want to cover the binding on that zipper tape halfway. Okay, we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew that top edge of the binding 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. And actually before I lied when I said we wouldn't need the zipper foot anymore. Depending on if you're using the handbag zipper like I am, or as called for in the pattern, the all-purpose zipper, you might not be able to get close enough to the binding with your regular foot. So if that's the case, you might need to switch out to your zipper foot. But try it with your regular foot first. Depending on your zipper, you might be okay. Okay, so this is the right side of the zipper. For this last piece of binding, I'm actually going to flip to the wrong side of the zipper. So here's my last piece of binding, and to make it simple, I'm just going to use, again, the Wonder Tape on the top edge of the zipper tape, right up against the edge. Okay, and I'm going to finger press that binding wrong sides together, and the raw edge of the binding is going to be placed on that top edge of the zipper. And again, wrong side of the zipper here. Okay, and then just use some Wonder clips to secure it. We're going to be sewing this pinned edge 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. Okay, so I've got my mesh laid out so that the right side of the zipper is facing out. And I'm just going to press that seam toward that, up toward the folded edge of the binding. Okay, now I'm just going to bring that binding down so that it covers the stitch line. And then I'll use my Wonder clips to secure it in place. So as you'll notice, my zipper's a little bit longer than the binding and the mesh. And I'm going to wait to trim that zipper down until I've attached it to the lining with that zippered pouch. So if your zipper is longer as well, just leave it in place for now. No need to trim it yet. Okay, so I'm going to sew that lower edge of the binding 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. Okay, now it's time to attach the mesh to that lining main panel with that zipper pouch already attached to it. So the bottom edge of the mesh is going to be even with the bottom edge of the lining fabric, and the side edges should also be aligned. If you're working with a longer zipper, make sure that zipper head is within the side edges of the lining main panel. And then go ahead and just use Wonder Clips to secure everything in place. And if you feel more comfortable, you can use that Dritz wash away tape to secure that top edge of the binding. Okay, we're going to sew the top edge of the binding 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric, and we're also going to sew the sides and the bottom 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the lining fabric. So you can see the lining fabric through the mesh, so you want to follow that curve when you get to those two bottom corners. And I'm just going to use my zipper to trim, my scissors to trim the overhang of the zipper, if there is any. And then same thing on that bottom corner with the mesh. Just trim the overhang and do the same thing for the other side.